You walk through your front door after the worst day imaginable, and something happens that no human being will ever do for you. No judgment, no conditions, no memory of the argument you had last week. Just pure, absolute biological certainty that you are the single greatest thing to have ever entered this room. And if you've ever felt that and called it love, stay with me, because a question is going to follow you through every second of this video. Is what your dog feels for you actually love, or is it something older, stranger, and far more unsettling than love has ever been? Here is the creature we are talking about. Order Carnivora, family Canidae, species Canis lupus familiaris. Pay attention to those first two words, Canis lupus. That is the wolf. Your domestic dog is not descended from the wolf. It is not related to the wolf. It is a subspecies of the wolf. If your dog were a tiger subspecies, you would not let it sleep on your pillow. The genetic distance between a Chihuahua and a grey wolf is approximately 0.2%. The genetic distance between a human being and a chimpanzee is around 1.2%. Your Chihuahua is genetically closer to a wolf than you are to a chimpanzee. The creature begging for cheese at your feet carries the genome of one of the most efficient apex predators this planet has ever produced. 42 teeth, 4 canines, each capable of piercing several millimeters of skin in a single strike. The bite pressure of an average dog runs between 150 and 200 kilograms per square centimeter. Large breeds reach 350. A human bite generates roughly 70 kilograms per square centimeter. Your Labrador bites 3 to 5 times harder than you do. And this same animal lies still while a 3-year-old child pulls its ears and laughs. Something happened, something so profound and so strange that it rewired both species forever. To understand it, you need to go back somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years to a moment that science still cannot pin down with certainty. The domestication of the dog is one of the most contested questions in all of zoology. A 2015 genetic study led by Adam Boyko of Cornell University pushed the timeline back to somewhere between 27,000 and 40,000 years ago. Other analyses of ancient DNA recovered from remains found in Belgium and Siberia suggest a range of 18,000 to 36,000 years. The more researchers dig, the less certain the answer becomes. But here is what every competing theory agrees on. The dog came first. Before cattle, before horses, before cats, before sheep, before pigs, before any other animal humanity ever domesticated, there was the dog. Our ancestors did not yet know how to plant wheat, and they were already sleeping beside wolves. The popular story, the one about a kind hunter finding an orphaned wolf pup and raising it by hand, is almost certainly wrong. The hypothesis that most researchers now support is called self-domestication. Some call it the garbage hypothesis, and it is considerably less romantic. When humans began living in settled groups, their campsites generated waste, bones, discarded scraps, the residue of every meal. For wolves, this was a permanent, unguarded food source, but not every wolf could access it. The most aggressive individuals, the most fearful ones, stayed away. The wolves that possessed slightly lower aggression, slightly higher tolerance for human proximity, those animals approached, fed, survived, and passed those particular traits to their offspring. Nobody tamed anything. Nobody chose anything. A subset of wolves chose a strategy, proximity to humans over independent hunting, and that strategy paid off across thousands of generations until the animal on the other side of that strategy was no longer quite a wolf. The wolves domesticated themselves, and there is a serious argument that in doing so, they domesticated us. The most compelling evidence for this came from an experiment that began in 1959 and is still running today. Soviet geneticist Dmitry Belyaev started selectively breeding silver foxes at a Novosibirsk farm, choosing for reproduction only the individuals that showed the least fear and aggression toward humans. No training, no tricks. One selection criterion, reaction to a person. Within 6 generations, foxes were wagging their tails and whimpering with excitement at the sight of a human being. By the 10th generation, floppy ears appeared, spotted coats, curled tails, traits that wild foxes never display. By 20 generations, the foxes were licking hands and seeking physical contact. By 40, they were behaviorally indistinguishable from domestic dogs. Belyaev had proved something fundamental. When you select for friendliness, you get the entire domestication package as a bundle. Shortened snouts, Juvenile behavior retained into adulthood, playfulness, expressiveness. All of it arrives together because it is all controlled by the same underlying genetic architecture. The dogs at our campfires went through the same transformation, not in 60 years in a laboratory, but across thousands of years in the firelight, in the dark, in the space between wild and tame, where a species reinvented itself. Now, consider what that reinvented body is actually capable of. The dog's nose contains up to 300 million olfactory receptors. Humans have approximately 6 million, but the receptor count only begins the story. The region of the brain dedicated to processing scent is proportionally 40 times larger in a dog than in a human being. Your dog does not experience a more intense version of what you smell. It experiences an entirely different sensory universe, one in which every object carries a chemical signature, every person has a unique olfactory identity, and every emotion leaves a physical trace in the air. A 2018 study from the University of Lincoln demonstrated that dogs can distinguish the scent of adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormones in human sweat. When you are afraid, your dog knows before you do, not from your behavior, from your chemistry. A 2022 study from Queen's University Belfast went further, showing that trained dogs identified stress states from sweat samples with an accuracy of 93.75%, higher accuracy than many clinical diagnostic tests, from a smell. The ears rotate independently, controlled by 18 separate muscles. Humans have 6, and most of us cannot move our ears at all. A dog can aim each ear like a radar dish, monitoring 2 separate sound sources simultaneously. The upper hearing range extends to 65,000 hertz. Ours stops around 20,000. A dog hears the squeak of a mouse beneath snow. It hears your car 2 blocks away and is already at the door before you have turned onto the street. What owners routinely interpret as telepathy is simply a sensory instrument tuned to frequencies that are completely invisible to us. The eyes are more complicated. The old belief that dogs see only in black and white is false. Dogs possess 2 types of cone cells instead of our 3, giving them a color range roughly equivalent to human deuteranopia, a form of color blindness. They cannot distinguish red from green, but they have far more rod cells, the receptors responsible for low light vision, and behind the retina sits a layer called the tapetum, a biological mirror that amplifies any available light. A dog sees in darkness approximately 5 times more clearly than you do. The hunting animal is still inside the companion, even when the only prey is a tennis ball. Touch is the sense that tends to be overlooked, and it may be the most important. Puppies are born blind and deaf. Touch is their first experience of the world, and it never stops being essential. When you stroke a dog, its heart rate slows and its cortisol levels drop. But the same thing happens to you. A 2019 study from Washington State University measured cortisol in 300 students before and after 10 minutes of contact with a dog. The reduction was 23%, 10 minutes. The effect size is comparable to mild pharmaceutical anxiolytics. Warm, breathing, no prescription required. The vibrissae, the stiff sensory hairs on a dog's muzzle, above the eyes and beneath the chin, detect air currents and vibrations with enough precision that blind dogs navigate confidently through familiar spaces, sensing walls and obstacles before making physical contact. The sense of touch extends several centimeters beyond the body itself. And the heart. A 2019 study from the University of Linköping found that when a dog and its owner rest quietly together, their heart rates begin to align. Not match perfectly, but move in the same rhythmic direction, like 2 pendulums on a shared surface. Physiological synchrony, measurable, documentable, happening in your living room right now if you have a dog sleeping near you. Have you noticed your dog reading your emotional state before you have fully registered it yourself? Write that in the comments, because what comes next explains exactly how it does it. For a long time, the scientific consensus treated dog intelligence as a form of sophisticated obedience. Trainable, responsive, but not genuinely cognitive. That consensus collapsed in the early 2000s, and the person most responsible for collapsing it was Brian Hare, an evolutionary anthropologist at Duke University. In 2002, Hare published a study built around a deceptively simple question. Can dogs follow a pointing gesture? Can they understand what it means when a human finger indicates a specific direction? The question sounds trivial. The answer is not. Chimpanzees, our closest genetic relatives, cannot do this reliably. You can point at a bowl of food for a chimpanzee and it will look at your finger, at your arm, possibly try to bite you, but it will not go to the bowl. Wolves raised by humans from birth cannot do it either. 8-week-old puppies with zero training do it on the first attempt. It is not learned, it is innate. A dog is born with a module for reading human communicative intent that no other animal on Earth possesses from birth. Hare called this the domestication hypothesis. Over thousands of generations of proximity to humans, dogs developed a unique category of social cognition oriented specifically toward us. Not smarter than chimpanzees in the general sense, smarter than chimpanzees in one crucial domain: understanding what we mean. Dogs track the direction of your gaze. They recognize when you are addressing them versus someone else. They read facial expressions. A 2016 study from the University of Lincoln and the University of Sao Paulo showed that dogs integrate information across sensory channels in real time. An angry voice matched with an angry face registers as a coherent emotional signal, but an angry voice paired with a happy face produces confusion and altered behavior. Dogs are performing multimodal emotional passing on you continuously, without effort, without awareness that they are doing it. Stanley Coren, a psychologist at the University of British Columbia, found that the average dog learns between 165 and 250 words and gestures. That is the vocabulary level of a 2-year-old child. But a border collie named Chaser, trained by psychology professor John Pilley at Wofford College, learned the names of more than 1,000 individual objects. 1,000. She could retrieve any of them by name. She understood grammatical distinctions. Fetch the ball to the doll is a different instruction from fetch the doll to the ball, and she executed both correctly. She grasped categorical logic, understanding that a ball, a block, and a frisbee belong to the class toy, while a piece of wood does not. Chaser died in 2019. The ceiling of canine language comprehension has still not been found. Dogs also deceive. A 2017 study by Marianne Heberlein at the University of Zurich demonstrated strategic deception in controlled conditions. Dogs learned which of two human partners would share food and which would keep it. They rapidly learned to lead the generous partner toward the food bowl. But the critical finding was more sophisticated. They also learned to lead the selfish partner to the empty bowl, then redirect their owner to the full one. This is not a reflex. This is sequential planning, social modeling of other minds, and deliberate misdirection. When I first read the methodology of that experiment, I went back and read it a second time because the cognitive architecture it implies does not fit comfortably inside what we expect from a dog. But the layer of intelligence that matters most is not linguistic and not strategic. In 2012, researchers at Goldsmiths, University of London, asked people to cry, to speak normally, and to hum in the presence of both their own dogs and unfamiliar dogs. The dogs approached the crying person consistently, regardless of whether that person was the owner or a complete stranger. If a human was in distress, the dog moved toward it. No one taught the dogs to do this. There was no reward for doing it. The behavior emerged from something else entirely, and the question of what that something is has divided animal cognition researchers ever since. Now we arrive at the center of the whole question. In 2015, Japanese researcher Miho Nagasawa at Azabu University published a study in the journal Science that permanently changed the framing of this debate. Nagasawa measured oxytocin levels in dogs and their owners before and after interaction. Oxytocin is the neuropeptide released when a mother looks at her infant, when people in love embrace, when deep attachment is experienced between individuals. It is not a metaphor for love. It is the measurable molecular substrate of love. The results were striking. When a dog and its owner made extended eye contact, oxytocin levels rose in both. In the human, predictable. In the dog, revolutionary. And the oxytocin surge in the dog during prolonged eye contact with its owner was comparable in magnitude to the surge that occurs in a human mother looking at her newborn infant. Pause on that. When your dog looks at you with that expression that says, "You are the entire reason this world is worth inhabiting," the neurochemical event happening in its brain is the same class of event that bonds a mother to a child. Not similar? The same hormone, the same mechanism, the same molecule. Nagasawa then ran the identical experiment with wolves that had been raised by humans from birth, wolves that had been socialized, fed, cared for, integrated into human households. The result? 0. No oxytocin elevation in the wolves, no oxytocin elevation in the humans. A wolf can live with you for 20 years. The eye contact will not trigger that cascade. A dog can trigger it on the first day. What this means is that over thousands of years of coevolution, dogs did not simply learn to live near humans. They integrated themselves into the human biochemical system of attachment. They found the mechanism that evolution built to bond mothers to infants and redirected it toward themselves. Eye contact with your dog initiates an oxytocin loop. You feel attachment, you engage with the dog feels attachment, it looks at you longer, the oxytocin rises higher, and the loop closes. Call it a cycle of love or call it a cycle of manipulation. The chemistry is identical either way. And then there is the face. In 2019, Julianne Kaminski at the University of Portsmouth published an anatomical study comparing the facial musculature of dogs and wolves. She identified a muscle present in dogs that does not exist in wolves. It is called the levator anguli oculi medialis. It raises the inner corner of the eyebrow. It is the muscle responsible for the puppy dog look, eyes widening, expression softening, face becoming uncannily more human. Wolves do not have it. It evolved in dogs specifically, under selection pressure, because dogs that produced stronger emotional responses in humans received more food, more care, and more protection, and therefore survived and reproduced at higher rates. The muscle that makes your dog look heartbroken is an adaptation shaped by natural selection to manipulate your nervous system. And it works. Research shows that shelter dogs with more pronounced inner brow movement are adopted more quickly. The more devastated the expression, the faster they go home. Is that manipulation? From an evolutionary perspective, it is an adaptation for extracting resources from another species. From the dog's perspective, it is nothing at all. The dog does not know it has this muscle. It simply looks at you and you melt, as humans have melted for thousands of years. Has your dog ever deployed those eyes at precisely the right moment and you knew with absolute certainty that it was calculated? Write it in the comments. Wolves barely bark. An adult wolf produces a bark as a single alarm signal, rare and brief. Barking, as a sustained communication system, is an invention of the domestic dog, developed over millennia of living with a species that cannot hear what wolves hear, cannot smell what wolves smell, and needs its information delivered loudly and repeatedly. A 2005 study by Pongratz and colleagues at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest played recordings of dog barks in different contexts to people who had never owned a dog. Without training, without context, these people correctly identified which barks expressed isolation, which expressed threat, and which expressed play. The capacity to decode the signal appears to be built into the human auditory system. We developed a shared language without intending to, and we understand each other better than either species seems to realize. Tail direction encodes emotional valence. A 2007 study by Giorgio Velotigara at the University of Trento showed that rightward tail wags correlate with positive arousal, driven by the left hemisphere, while leftward wags correlate with anxiety and withdrawal, driven by the right. Other dogs read this asymmetry and respond to it physiologically. A 2013 follow-up showed dogs display elevated heart rates when observing a silhouette with a leftward biased wag. They are reading each other's tails the way we read each other's faces. Yawning in dogs is contagious, but only in response to a familiar person. An unfamiliar human's yawn does not trigger it. A 2013 study by Teresa Romero at the University of Tokyo identified contagious yawning in dogs as a marker of empathic resonance, not fatigue. The dog mirrors your relaxation because it is attuned to your internal state at a level that most humans never achieve with other humans. Now consider the myth that governed dog training for decades, the alpha theory. The idea was simple. Dogs live by pack law. You must dominate, eat first, never let the dog on furniture, pin it on its back, hold its gaze until it submits. The theory originated with David Mech, who published The Wolf in 1970 and described an alpha-dominated hierarchy in wolf packs. The book became a bestseller. The concept saturated popular culture and the entire dog training industry. The problem is that Mech was wrong, and he said so himself. In 1999, 30 years later, he published a paper formally retracting the alpha concept. He explained that his original observations were made on captive wolves, unrelated animals from different families forced into artificial proximity in an enclosure. Of course, they fought for hierarchy. Of course, a dominant individual emerged, but wild wolf packs are not like that. A wild wolf pack is a family, two parents, and their offspring. There is no alpha. There are parents who provision and protect their young, that is all. Mech tried to have the original book recalled. The publisher refused, it sold too well. The man who created the alpha myth spent 30 years trying to kill it and could not because the myth was more commercially durable than the science. And even if the alpha concept had been accurate for wolves, it would not apply to dogs. The domestic dog is not a miniaturized wolf navigating pack politics. Modern behavioral science describes the dog-human relationship not as a dominance hierarchy, but as an attachment relationship, specifically the same category of attachment that psychologist John Bowlby described in Human Children. The dog uses its owner as a secure base for exploring the world, ranging outward, returning to check, ranging outward again, precisely as a 2-year-old uses a parent. Not because a dog is a child, but because evolution found the same effective architecture twice. A 2013 study by Lisa Horn at the University of Veterinary Medicine Vienna formalized this directly. Dogs were placed in a room with their owner, with a stranger, or alone. Dogs with their owner explored more actively and showed lower anxiety. Dogs alone or with a stranger were passive and unsettled. The classic secure attachment pattern, textbook from a dog. Your dog does not see you as a pack leader. It sees you as a parent, and what it gives you in exchange for that relationship is not trivial. A 2019 American Heart Association study found that dog owners have a 24% lower risk of death from all causes compared to non-owners. 24%. Your dog is literally extending your life. Dogs grieve. This is not anthropomorphism. A 2022 study led by Federica Pirone at the University of Milan surveyed over 400 owners of multi-dog households in which one dog had died. 86% of the surviving dogs changed their behavior. They played less, ate less, slept more, vocalized more, searched the home for the absent companion. Some did this for weeks, some for months. They do not understand death as a concept, but they register absence and respond to it with the same behavioral profile that we call grief. I remember thinking the first time I read this research that the difference between us and them might not be in the presence or absence of feeling, but only in the ability to put feeling into language. Consider what they have given us practically. During the Second World War, Soviet military dogs evacuated more than 680,000 wounded soldiers from active combat zones. That is the population of a substantial city carried from the battlefield on the instinct of a domesticated wolf. Guide dogs have given millions of blind people the freedom of independent movement. The first guide dog school opened in Germany in 1916 for soldiers blinded in the First World War. Therapy dogs in cardiac units reduce patient anxiety by 24% per visit, equivalent to mild pharmaceutical sedation with no side effects. Dogs trained to detect cancer in urine, exhaled breath, and skin samples have demonstrated accuracy rates of up to 97% in some studies, identifying malignancies that imaging technology had not yet found. The methodology varies across studies, and not all results replicate cleanly, but the basic biological premise is uncontroversial. 300 million olfactory receptors aimed at biochemical signals of cellular abnormality. That the tool is extraordinary, we are still learning to use it, and then there are the ones we failed. More than 200 million dogs are currently homeless worldwide. Every one of them is the descendant of an animal that made a bet on us. Every one of them inherited the genetic legacy of the wolves that chose our campfires over the open forest. And every one of them is evidence of what we do with that bet. In the United States alone, approximately 6.5 million dogs enter shelters annually. Around 900,000 are euthanized. That is 2,500 dogs every single day in a country that calls itself a nation of animal lovers. In the last 2 centuries of intensive breeding, we created more than 400 dog breeds. Many are functional masterpieces. Others are evidence of what happens when aesthetic preference overrides biological welfare. The English Bulldog cannot breathe normally. Its compressed skull narrows the nostrils, elongates the soft palate, and constricts the trachea. Every breath is a physical effort. A 2022 study from the Royal Veterinary College London found that English Bulldogs live an average of 7.4 years, 4 years less than average dogs. More than 80% of their puppies are delivered by cesarean section. We created a breed that cannot breathe and cannot reproduce without surgical intervention, and we find it charming. The Cavalier King Charles Spaniel has a skull too small to contain its own brain. The condition is called syringomyelia. The brain tissue is compressed against the cranium, causing chronic pain. A study by Claire Rusbridge at the University of Surrey found that up to 70% of Cavaliers over 6 years of age show signs of this condition. The animal lives its entire life with a headache. We designed that headache into the breed standard. We did that. Breeders dispute the severity of these problems and argue that modern genetic screening is making breeds healthier. The counter-argument is in the data, and the data is concerning. And there is movement in the other direction. The Netherlands declared itself free of stray dogs in 2016 through sterilization programs, microchipping, and enforcement of cruelty laws without a single mass coup. Costa Rica criminalized animal cruelty with prison sentences in 2017. Temple dogs in parts of India are fed and cared for through communal resources as a cultural practice. Change is possible, it is just slow, and it requires decisions. In 2017, neuroscientist Gregory Burns at Emory University published findings from fMRI scans conducted on awake, unanesthetized dogs who had been trained over months to lie still voluntarily inside the scanner. When these dogs were given the scent of their owner to smell, the caudate nucleus activated. That is the brain region associated with anticipation of reward, with pleasure, with the neural experience of something desired. It activated more strongly for the owner's scent than for the scent of food, more than for any other dog. Your dog, at the chemical level of brain function, experiences more pleasure from your proximity than from eating. Burns then described something larger. The emotional architecture of the dog's brain, the placement and function of the regions governing fear, joy, attachment, and loss is structurally and functionally analogous to our own. Not similar, analogous, functionally equivalent. His conclusion, published in a peer-reviewed monograph, stated that in the domain of emotional experience, dogs are functionally identical to humans. That finding has not been successfully refuted. And there is a hypothesis put forward by anthropologist Pat Shipman of Penn State University in 2015 that the domestication of the dog gave Homo sapiens a decisive advantage over Neanderthals. The argument is that Neanderthals were physically stronger, possessed brains at least as large as ours, used tools, and buried their dead. But they did not have dogs. Our ancestors did. Dogs helped track prey, warned of predators, and guarded camp perimeters at night. That competitive edge, Shipman argues, may have been sufficient to tip the balance of a 10,000-year competition between two intelligent species. The hypothesis is contested. But the thought that we won, not because we were smarter or stronger, but because we had a friend, is one of those ideas that is difficult to entirely dismiss. Bolter was a half-wolf, half-husky sled dog who in January 1925 led a relay team through a blizzard across 1,085 kilometers of Alaskan wilderness to deliver diphtheria antitoxin to the isolated town of Nome. No GPS, no roads, nose and instinct. The children of that town are alive because of a dog. There is a bronze statue of Bolter in Central Park. The nose is polished to a shine because every visitor touches it. Even in bronze, a dog draws human warmth. Laika was a stray from the streets of Moscow. On November 3rd, 1957, she became the first living creature to orbit Earth. Not a human, not a primate, a stray dog. She preceded Yuri Gagarin into space by more than 3 years. She died within hours from overheating when the thermal regulation system failed. The Soviet government concealed the details of her death for decades. In 2008, Moscow erected a monument to her, a small dog perched on the nose of a rocket. It took half a century for the guilt to crystallize into stone. A 2009 study by Alexandra Horowitz at Barnard College dismantled the beloved myth of canine guilt. Horowitz found that the guilty look does not correlate with the dog having done something wrong. It correlates with the owner looking angry. Dogs scolded for things they had not done displayed the same lowered eyes, tucked ears, and submissive posture as dogs that had genuinely destroyed something, and dogs encountering owners who entered the room cheerfully after genuine destruction displayed none of it. The dog is not responding to its own behavior. It is reading your emotional state and responding to that. The guilty expression is not a confession. It is appeasement, social fluency directed at regulating your mood, not an expression of moral experience. Later research by Julie Hecht at the City University of New York in 2012 complicated this picture. Some dogs displayed the appeasement behavior in the owner's absence immediately after performing a prohibited action, suggesting that something like internalized rules may be present, a representation of what is permitted and what is not. Not guilt in the human sense, not pure reflex either, something between, something for which we do not yet have clean terminology. The physical range of the species is a category of miracle on its own. A Chihuahua weighs 1 kilogram, an English Mastiff weighs 110. That is a 73-fold difference in body mass within a single species. No other mammal on Earth shows that range of size variation within a species. The difference in skull shape between a greyhound and a pug is greater than the skull variation between any two species within the bear family. They can all still interbreed, one species, different planets of phenotype. A greyhound reaches 72 kilometers per hour. Usain Bolt's peak recorded speed was 44.72 kilometers per hour. The dog is faster by half and weighs 30 kilograms. Alaskan Huskies in the Iditarod cover 1,600 kilometers across Alaska in 8 to 10 days, sustaining 160 to 200 kilometers per day in temperatures reaching minus 40 degrees Celsius while pulling a loaded sled. No other land animal sustains that output for that duration. Research by Michael Davis at Oklahoma State University found that sled dogs shift into a metabolic mode that no other mammal uses. After the initial glycogen burning phase, their bodies begin directly oxidizing fats and proteins through pathways that remain only partially understood. The precise mechanism is still an open question in physiology. The Basenji, possibly the oldest living breed, is depicted on ancient Egyptian temple carvings thousands of years old. It does not bark. Instead, it produces a sound called a baru, a melodic, yodeling vocalization. Unlike anything else a domestic dog produces, it cleans itself like a cat. It smells like nothing at all. Some researchers believe the Basenji is closer than any other living breed to the original domesticated dog, to the wolves that first chose to sit at the edge of the firelight and wait. Every one of 400 breeds is an answer to a human need. Herd this, hunt that, pull this, warm my feet, sit in my lap, look beautiful. Every breed is a mirror. What you see in it is not the dog. It is the human who designed it. Here is where I land. A dog is not a pet. It is not a companion, not a furry friend, and certainly not an accessory. A dog is a species that placed its entire existence on a single bet. That proximity to humans was worth more than independence, more than wildness, more than the full expression of what a wolf is built to be. That bet was placed not once, not by one animal, but across thousands of generations by millions of individual creatures who each chose the fire over the forest. In exchange for that bet, the dog changed its face to make you love it. It changed its brain to understand you. It grew a muscle that did not exist in its ancestor specifically to make its eyes look like something you could not refuse. It learned to bark because you cannot hear what wolves hear. It learned to grieve because it actually bonds to things. It learned to read your cortisol levels before you know you are stressed. It inserted itself into the biochemical loop that connects mothers to children, and it belongs there now because both of your bodies say so. Manipulation? Maybe. But a manipulation that produces identical oxytocin surges in both parties, that extends human lifespans by measurable margins, that has pulled wounded soldiers from battlefields and guided blind people through cities and detected cancers that machines had missed, that grieves the dead and rescues the living, and has followed us across every continent and through every catastrophe for 40,000 years without once deciding it had made the wrong choice. That is not manipulation in any sense the word was designed to carry. Every time your dog looks at you, it is making the same choice again, freely, without memory of being betrayed, without accounting for the 200 million abandoned, without holding a single grievance for Laika, just the same clear-eyed, biochemically verified, evolutionarily ancient decision. You, again, still you, always you. Maybe we have not earned that, but the dog keeps deciding anyway, and that is perhaps the most extraordinary thing any creature has ever done. If this changed the way you think about the animal at your feet, tell me in the comments which moment in this video stopped you cold. And if you want to go further into the hidden interior lives of the animals we share this world with, the next video is already waiting.